So the very first thing in trigonometry, like I said, we're dealing with triangles. We're dealing with the sides and the angles of the triangles. So our essential question really that we want to know today is, how do you solve for an unknown side and for an unknown angle using trigonometry? So basically there's going to be one side that we don't know. Now, we used to be able to do like the Pythagorean theorem to solve for the missing side. But in these, we're not going to be able to use the Pythagorean theorem because we might be looking for an angle instead. Or we might only know one side, where to use the Pythagorean theorem, we got to know two sides. So example number one is as simple and as basic as just typing it in. So if you have a calculator, if you don't, you can use your phone calculator too, Desmos, whatever. But you just want to type in the actual evaluating. So there is a sine button, there is a cosine button, and there is a tangent button on the calculator. And so what you want to do is just use one of those buttons. So you either want to you're going to use sine, cosine, or tangent, and they're right across the top there, above the 789 and above the comma and the parentheses. And we will just type it in directly. Now, there's one issue that may give you the wrong answer. So we're going to talk about how some people may get different answers on this first problem, and then we'll fix that issue kind of right away. So in the first problem, we say sine of 78. Now, when you do sine of 78, I'm going to guess, sine is that button right above the comma. I'm going to guess that you got one of two answers, okay? The first answer that you might have got is 0.51, okay? The other answer you might have got is 0.978, 0.98. One of those is right and one of those is wrong, okay? On Desmos, what does it give you if you hit sine 78? You know?
It's 0.978.
Yeah. So on Desmos, it actually puts you in the right mode automatically if you hit sine of 78. It's 0.978. So if you didn't get 0.978, let's say you got 0.513. The first issue here is we're talking about, these are degrees. These are angles, degrees. So our mode right here, our calculator has to be in degree mode. So we have to hit mode, which is right beside the second button on the calculator. And if you go down to that third row, it says radian or degree. We got to be in degree mode. Now, typically, so let's say you like reset the batteries or take the batteries out or redo your calculator. Like by default, a lot of times it's actually in radian mode because that's the one on the left. So we have to actually go in and hit enter, change it to degree mode. Now, when we do sine of 78, we get 0.978 or 0.98. It doesn't say how much we have to round these to. It should tell you in most of the problems. So on this one, I'll just round it to 2 decimal places. I'll say it's 0.98. Okay? Let's find cosine of 78. If I round that to 2 decimal places, what is it? 0.21. And then if I do tangent of 78, that is, 4.7, and it would round, it's 0. So 4.7 or 4.70. So I have, all I did in example 1, all they're showing you at the very beginning is, here's the buttons on your calculator, right? It's as simple as that. Obviously, all the problems aren't going to be that easy, but that's just the introduction. So here's where it's at on your calculator sometimes. Evaluate the following. So take a minute and do cosine 45, sine 45, and tangent 45, and round those to 2 decimal places, and then we'll come right back and make sure we got that. For cosine of 45. 0.71. That's what I got. And for sine of 45. Interesting. 0.71 also. And for tangent of 45? 1. Interesting. Now, Does anybody have any idea? There is a pattern here to sine, cosine, and tangent. Does anybody know what the pattern could be? There's a way you can get tangent from sine and cosine. Any idea? No idea. Okay, so check it out on number 1. This, so whatever sine is, divided by whatever cosine is, should give you tangent. Okay? So 0.98 divided by 0.21 is 4.666, that's 4.7. So tangent is actually sine divided by cosine. So think about it this way. Sine in this one is 0.71, right? Cosine is 0.71. 0.71 divided by 0.71 is 1. That's why tangent is 1 in the other. So that's just kind of a trick of where does tangent come from. You'll need that later because when we're doing this unit circle, which is going to be kind of crazy. And that's what our project is on for unit 5. When we're creating a unit circle, we're going to be doing sine divided by cosine for tangent, and we're going to have to know that. So that's sine, cosine, tangent. No? SOHCAHTOA. You don't remember anybody saying that? Okay, maybe we missed it because of the thing. We'll give you a break, maybe. But the trig functions are called sine, cosine, tangent, and that's cosecant, secant, and cotangent. There's 6 of them. There's 3 trig functions that are really important: sine, cosine, tangent. Then these 3 actually come from these 3. Okay. So this is only for, we're talking about right triangles right now. Here's the angle. You see that little circle with the line through it? That's called theta. That's the angle that we're actually talking about. So that's the angle we're trying to solve for, this angle right here. The O here stands for, all the way across from that angle is called the opposite. So this is the opposite side. Across from the right angle of a triangle is called the hypotenuse, yeah. And then, so we're only missing one side. Right beside the angle is called adjacent. Okay, so those are the 3 sides that we always have to know. We look at the angle and we say, what's all the way across from it? That's the opposite. What's across from the right angle? That's the hypotenuse. What's right beside the angle? That's the adjacent. Okay, and that's where all of our sine, cosine, tangent, all that comes from. So the word or the way that we like to kind of help you memorize this, and you do have to memorize this, is SOHCAHTOA. So you just got to say that over and over. SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so is sine. Sine is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite divided by hypotenuse. That's sine. Okay. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that's how you remember those, how you get the numbers, is by those 2 sides. And how you remember those sides is from SOHCAHTOA. So sine opposite over hypotenuse. That's so. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. TOA, tangent, is opposite over adjacent. All right. Now, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Those 3, you actually don't have to know them because you just flip the first ones. So if you know sine, you know cosecant. So you just flip sine, and that's how you get cosecant. So instead of opposite over hypotenuse, it's just hypotenuse over opposite. So if you just know that you flip it, then you're fine. Okay, same thing for secant. If you know cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse, this is just hypotenuse over adjacent. And if you know tangent is opposite over adjacent, then cotangent is adjacent over opposite. Okay, so you do need to know these. So I would just try to learn SOHCAHTOA, and that will help you know sine, cosine, tangent. If you're able to write sine, cosine, and tangent down, then you should be able to write the other ones down, which at that point, you'll have all 6. Okay, so example 2, let's look at it. It says find the indicated trigonometric ratio. That's a fancy word for saying find the fraction and its decimal rounded to the nearest 10,000. So you got tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000. That's 4 decimal places. Okay, so sine of m. So we're going to look at m. Sine is what? What's the fraction? It's going to be opposite, so 16 over hypotenuse, 34. So 16 over 34, and then we want to write what that is as a decimal. Okay? Let's go to number 2. Cosecant of z. Let's look at cosecant. That's hypotenuse over opposite. We look at z. Here's z. The hypotenuse is 20. The opposite is 16. So hypotenuse over opposite is 20 over 16. And we'll end up writing that decimal. Tangent of L. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we go to L. Opposite is 30. Adjacent is 16. So that's 30 over 16. Secant of X. Well, secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. So we look at X. The hypotenuse is 20. The adjacent is 16. So it's actually also 20 over 16. Cosine of L. So we go to L. Adjacent is 16. Hypotenuse is 34. So 16 over 34. And we already had 16 over 34 earlier. And then cotangent of Z. So we go to Z. Cotangent is adjacent. That would be 12 over the opposite. That would be 16. So we got 12 over 16. So there's all our fractions. You see how I found those. I showed you step by step how I found each of those. And then now you want to go in and write the decimal for those. So go in and put those in your calculator. Make sure you get the decimal. You want to do sine, cosine, tangent, any of those. Main thing you want to do is know SOHCAHTOA. And then the other thing that's very important that you want to do is you want to be able to look at that angle. So it tells you the letter. What angle should I look at? That's kind of where I start. And then go to wherever you're going, either opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse, depending on what you're solving. And that will give you the fraction. Once you have the fraction, you can just put the fraction in the calculator, and that's going to give you the decimal there. So all that is the fraction. We're not finding the angle. We're not doing anything yet. We're just finding what are the sides. Okay, what are the sides of the triangle? And notice, we didn't even have to find the sides of the triangle. That was nice. They already gave us all 3 sides of the triangle, so we didn't even have to go find them. All right, so we're going to move down to example 3. It says solve the following triangle, and the triangle is ABC. Okay, so if we want to solve the following triangle, we don't have any of the sides. That's bad. Okay, we do know on here, what does it say on your page? Does it just give you secant? Is that the only one it gives you? Okay, so it tells us that secant is 5 over 4. Okay, secant of theta. Well, there should be a mark. There's supposed to be this is theta. There should be a mark right there. Okay, is 5 over 4. So what is secant? What is the formula that we wrote above? Hypotenuse over adjacent. Okay, so if secant is 5 over 4, hypotenuse must be 5, and adjacent must be 4. Okay, so we know 2 of the sides there. what side are we missing? We're missing the opposite, right? So to find the opposite, we actually can use something that we knew earlier. That is the Pythagorean theorem in a right triangle. If they don't give us all three sides, we can actually find the third side by using the Pythagorean theorem. So we can say a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And we know the 4 and we know the 5. So a squared equals 5 squared minus 4 squared. That's 25 minus 16. That's 9. So a is the square root of 9, which is 3. So we're able to use the Pythagorean theorem and get this side is 3. So look at that angle down there that has the little mark with it. And let's fill in all the other ones. So what is sine of that angle? Opposite over hypotenuse. What would that be? From right here. Yeah, 0.6. It'd be 3 over 5. And man, that's 0.6. Cosine would be adjacent over hypotenuse. That would be 4 over 5, which is 0.8. Tangent would be opposite over adjacent. That would be 3 over 4, which is 0.75. Now, remember, if you get sine, cosine, and tangent, you got the other ones, you just flip them. Okay? So if this is 3 over 5, this is 5 over 3. If this is 4 over 5, that one's 5 over 4. If this is 3 over 4, this is 4 over 3. Okay? So you can write the decimal beside those. So sine is 3/5, that's 0.6. Cosine is 4/5, that's 0.8. Tangent is 3/4, that is 0.75. Cosecant is 5/3, that would be like 1.6667, something like that. Secant is 5/4, that's 1.25. And then cotangent is 4/3, that's 1.3333 as you go through there. So that is example 3. That's how they can give you a triangle, and you may have to solve for a missing side. So there was a missing side. We had to use Pythagorean theorem to find that missing side. Once we found that missing side, we were able to do sine, cosine, tangent, all of that. Okay? And we were able to get through all of that and find the entire triangle. Okay, so let's go to example 4. Now, it says there is another thing on your calculator to find these angles when they look like this. So it's a little bit different. So on your calculator earlier, we were finding the missing side. Now we're trying to find the missing angle. So if you look on number 4, 5, or example 4, A, B, and C. To find cosine A of 0.734, when you're looking for an angle on your calculator, if you look at the cosine button, there's a little thing above it that looks like this. It says that means inverse. That is actually what you use when you're trying to find the angle. Okay? So the way you get that to come up is you hit second, right? Because it's in blue. So you hit second sine. You make sure your calculator's still in degrees, like it should have been from earlier. But we hit second. So for A, we hit second cosine. That'll give us that cosine to the -1. That's the inverse of 0.7431. And that's going to give us the angle. What's the angle? 42. That's all we got to do. You don't have to, because it's 0.00 or whatever. Just 42 degrees. Now, think about it. These are angles, so they should be like bigger numbers. They shouldn't be really small numbers because they're angles. They could be, but not. They should be somewhere. They're angles in a triangle. So we're thinking like 90 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees. So let's look at sine of 0.4848. You got to get second sine to get that little negative. What does that one round to? About what? About 29 degrees. I got 28.999. Anybody else get that? Okay, good. So that's second sine. Lastly, if we want to find the tangent, we're going to get second tangent of 0.5317. And that one should be about what? 28 degrees. Okay? So there's all my angles. So if you notice, anytime I'm solving for the angle, I'm going to hit that second button on the calculator. So that was a difference in the first one. So let's try the three below there yourself. In A, you want to do second tangent. B, second cosine. C, second sine. 4672. What do you get? 25. Okay. What about the second one? Second cosine of 0.8208. What was it? 35. And then lastly, second sine of 0.6932. 44. Okay. So a lot of times when you do these, you're going to be able to round to the whole number on the degrees. It just depends what your directions say. But a lot of these will just give you an actual, because a lot of times when we do degrees, we get a whole number. We may not always, but that's how we can go through from there. Okay? So that is if they just give it to you, just like at the beginning, they were giving you a side and you just typed it in the calculator. Now they're giving you, trying to find an angle and you just type in the calculator. Now, example 5 and like the rest of this page is kind of what they want you to be able to do. So we're kind of building up to, here's what they want us to be able to do on this work here. So examples 5 and 6 are the big things. That's what you're going to have on your classwork today. Okay? So pay attention to these two. You're going to need to find the missing angle today, and you're also going to need to find the missing side today. So there's 10 questions. 5 of them will be find the missing side, and 5 of them will be find the missing angle. And that's going to be our big thing. Now, so here's the angle that we're wanting to find. Angle A up here, right? What do we know? What two sides, like 9 is what side of the triangle from angle A? Is it the opposite, hypotenuse, or adjacent? It's the adjacent. This is, so in this angle, we're doing, it's the adjacent. You know the adjacent side, and you know the hypotenuse. So which one can you do, sine, cosine, or tangent? If you know the adjacent and the hypotenuse. That's what we're going to have to know. You can do cosine. So cosine of, we don't know, so cosine of theta is what we call it if we don't know the angle, equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's 9 over 18. Right? Now, if we're trying to solve for an angle, notice what we did just a minute ago in your calculator. That's when we hit the second button. So if we're trying to solve for an angle, we're going to do the inverse of cosine of 9 over 18. And that should tell us how many degrees that angle is. So we're going to hit second cosine of 9 over 18. 60 degrees. Perfect. So we have found the angle is 60 degrees. Everybody see how we found that angle? You have to know, you have to look at the angle. You have to say, what two sides do I know? They're going to give you two sides. What two do I know? I know the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Sometimes you might know the opposite and the hypotenuse. You would use sine. Sometimes you might know the opposite and adjacent. You would use tangent. So what two sides do I know? That tells me what to use. Okay? And then I always, if I'm looking for an angle, I always hit second on there. Second sine, second cosine. All right, B. What two sides? So we're looking for angle Y down here. What two sides do we know? We know the hypotenuse is 15, and we know the opposite is 2. So we know opposite and hypotenuse. So which one can we use? Sine. So we're going to say sine of that angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. That's 2 over 15. So we're going to say sine. Again, we got to decide what two sides did they give me. That's how I know whether to use sine, cosine, or tangent. I'm only going to have 3 choices. Sine, cosine, or tangent. So I have the opposite side and the hypotenuse. So I'm going to do second sine of 2 over 15, and that should give me the angle. And that is, it's a small angle this time, 7.66 degrees. On the paper today, on the classwork today, it said to round to 2 decimal places. I think it says it in really, really big letters to remind you. It says round to 2 decimal places. It will tell you how much to round to when you're doing these problems. Some quizzes may say different. Some may say round to whatever. So that little angle there is only 7.66 degrees. Okay? Now, that's how you find the missing side. Or the missing angle. Sorry, the missing angle. That's how you find the missing angle. You decide, what 2 sides do I know? Do I know the 2 sides for sine? Do I know the 2 sides for cosine? Or do I know the 2 sides for tangent? And then you write them down and do second sine, second cosine, or second tangent. Okay? There's 5 like that today on the classwork. It won't take long if you know whether you're doing sine, cosine, or tangent. All right, now, there's also 5 like this. Find the missing side. Okay? You still got to figure out what 2 sides do I know. So here's the angle. We actually know the angle. It's 30. This x is what from 30? It is the what side? Opposite. This 15 in the triangle is the what? Is it the adjacent or the hypotenuse? Hypotenuse. If you're having trouble figuring out if it's the adjacent or the hypotenuse, remember the right angle across from the right angle, basically where that right angle is pointing, is always to the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the longest side, right, of the triangle. So, opposite and hypotenuse means we're going to use sine. So, sine of 30 degrees equals x over 15. Looks like an algebra problem. Okay? If you wanted to get x by itself, what would we need to do? Multiply by 15. So let's do that real quick. So we say times 15 and times 15. So 15 sine of 30 is equal to x. So at this point, we can go straight to our calculator and type it in just like it is. We can say 15 sine 30 tells me 7.5. The end. So that's how long that side is. 7.5. Okay? B. We have 43 degrees. This is A. Okay, this is the letter A. That is the opposite. And 11 is the what? Adjacent. It's not the hypotenuse. That would be the hypotenuse. So it's the adjacent. So opposite and adjacent means I'm using tangent. Right? Tangent is so cuts over. You got to remember which one. So that means I'm using tangent. So I'm going to say tangent of 43 degrees equals opposite over adjacent. A over 11. I'm going to be doing the same thing. I want to solve for A. So I'm going to times 11 times 11. So I get 11 tangent of 43 degrees equals A. And now I get to type that right in my calculator and it'll give me the missing side. It'll tell me that the missing side is 10.26 if we rounded it to 2 decimal places. It'll say that missing side is 10.26. It said 10.257, so we rounded it to 10.26. And that is our missing side. We just had to figure out, are we using sine, cosine, tangent? All right. What, the last? I got 11 tangent and 43. You did sine. Yes. C, here's the angle. It says we want to find the adjacent. That would be an x. There would be an x there. And this is the what? Hypotenuse. So which one are we going to use? Sine, cosine, or tangent? Yeah, we're going to use cosine because we've got adjacent and hypotenuse. So we already did one for sine and one for tangent, so y'all should have known one was coming for cosine. So we got the adjacent and the hypotenuse, so we're going to use cosine. So cosine of 21.8 degrees is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's going to be x over 5.39. So if I want to solve for x, I'm going to multiply by 5.39 to both sides. So I get 5.39 cosine of 21.8 degrees equals x. And now I get to just type that right into my calculator. So I know there's decimals there, but it doesn't make it any harder. Just type it in, 5.39 cosine 21.8, close the parentheses. I get 5.00, so it's just 5 is that side length. We know that this side right here is 5. And we figured that out by using cosine. So if you look at numbers 5 and 6, that's what you're going to be asked to do in this section. In number 5, A and B, you're trying to find the missing angle. So you have to decide, what am I using? Anytime you're trying to find the missing angle, you set them up. You do second sine, second cosine, second tangent to get the missing angle. In the bottom ones, you're trying to find the missing side. So again, you have to decide, are we using sine, cosine, or tangent? It depends what two sides you're looking at in the triangle. Are you using sine? If you got opposite and hypotenuse, you're using sine. If you got adjacent and hypotenuse, you're using cosine. If you got opposite and adjacent, you're using tangent. Now, quickly, I'll set you up on the quiz part. I'll let you see, or the classwork for today, I'll let you see how those problems will be set up. And we can make sure we have that. So if you look on the classwork, I'll pull it over here. On the classwork, it starts by solving for the missing side, okay? So look, we have this angle. We know the opposite and we know the hypotenuse. So I would want to use sine and set it up to find the missing side. Here's the angle. You know the opposite and the hypotenuse. Again, I would use sine. Here is the angle. I know the adjacent right beside it, and I know the hypotenuse, so I would use cosine. Here's an angle. I know the adjacent and the hypotenuse, so I would use cosine. Here's an angle. I know the opposite and the adjacent, so I would use tangent. Those are all the ones for finding a side. Then we go to finding an angle. Here's the angle, opposite and adjacent. That's tangent. So we're going to do tangent of 28 equals opposite over adjacent. Here is an angle. In this one, we don't know the angle. Okay, it says find the measure of the angle. That's what we're trying to do. So instead of trying to find the missing side, we're trying to find the missing angle. Opposite and hypotenuse. So we're going to use sine of opposite over hypotenuse. And remember, if you try to find an angle, it's second sine. Same thing here, but we have opposite and adjacent, so we would use tangent. Here we have opposite and hypotenuse, so we would use sine. And then here we have opposite and adjacent, so we would use tangent. So they're giving you the sides. You just have to know how to put it in the calculator. Now, on all of these at the top, it says to do the side lengths, when you're finding the missing side, they want you to round to 2 decimal places. But if you're finding the missing angle, they want you to round to the nearest degree. So if it says it's like 50.82, that would be 51 degrees, not 50.82. If you're finding a missing side, you round it to 2 decimal places. If you're finding the missing angle, it's round to the nearest whole degree. Okay? And that's the questions that we want to try to do today. So if you have any questions, you can let me know, and we'll go through that.